In late 2008, I began a quest to find Montagnard weavers who were still actively weaving in the Greensboro area. I wanted to know who could tell me their stories about weaving and how they carried on their tradition in a new environment. I found some women who once wove but had given up because they no longer had the time or couldn't locate the materials needed. Finding contacts and talking with local members of the Montagnard community has been a significant barrier to many research efforts because of the many tribes and languages represented here. And so my adventure began. Over the course of 2 years, I located many women, most of whom did not speak English, who showed me their weaving skills and opened up their culture to me. Eventually, we gathered as the Backstrap Weavers Group, Radeh, Jarai, Banar, Bunung, who wanted to try sharing their knowledge of weaving before it was too late. If backstrap weaving is to survive, it will be because of the dedication of these women and their determination to make it so against the pressures of rapid Americanization. These women, their families and friends, showed me the way. Early in this documentation project, I felt that my interview process should reflect the same informal, interactive dialogue I shared with all of the women, my Montagnard teachers. Although many male Montagnard leaders have been interviewed and documented in the past, Montagnard women traditionally shy away from formal interview techniques or elevating themselves above others in the community. Sine, like this, they say, look, and then you know. Ju is a Radeh woman in her 60s and the first weaver I met. She has taught me the process of weaving on a backstrap loom for more than a year now. The patterns and the textiles of Southeast Asia brought me to her, and her desire to teach weaving to someone who expressed an interest brought her to me. Even though we can't speak fluently to one another, we formed a relationship of trust and mutual friendship. Sometimes she cooks a meal for me and shows me what's going on in her house and her garden while I teach her English. Farming and weaving still set the tempo in Ju's life. No weave-in hot, weave-in cold, Ju often tells me. In Vietnam, she would only weave after the harvest. When it was time for spring planting, Ju would roll up her loom and work in the fields again. She follows this pattern here in Greensboro, too, where she and her husband Tomas raise fruits and vegetables in her large backyard garden. Her husband has also played an indispensable role as interpreter and craftsman, making looms, spinning wheels, and a portable warping board for the weavers. Montagnard men often assist the women in taking the threads off the warping board when the threads are transferred to a loom. When I first met her, she was bashful about speaking English and uncomfortable unless her husband was nearby to interpret. Although she has a modest and unassuming style, she's now more eager to interact with the public at weaving demonstrations. Ju's approach and artistic sensibility have often been generous, and I was lucky to have met her. As an artist, although she would never call herself that, and teacher, her instincts are to reach out to others such as myself and recently to newly arrived Bhutanese women who share her weaving passion. Like this, she says, look, and then you know. Ju has been instrumental in teaching the advanced task of warping a loom to other weavers. Some of the women I met seemed uncertain or insisted Ju warp for them. Ju is among the few women who are familiar with the complete process of traditional fabric production, from growing cotton to dyeing, spinning, warping, weaving, and finishing. Ju's main concern is that not enough younger Montagnard women are learning or continuing to weave here in Greensboro. You can't make mistakes, says Knight, and then chuckles after answering a student's question about how she takes care of a missed thread in her weaving. Knight, a Jarai weaver, takes much satisfaction out of teaching serious students how to weave or make the kate, a twine technique that is commonly seen at the bottom of traditional Montagnard clothing. Her precise approach and technical skills correlate with her teacher training and French education in Vietnam's Central Highlands in the 1950s and 60s. Recently, she met with Australian weaver and author Laverne Waddington, who is currently working with and documenting indigenous backstrap weavers in South America. According to Waddington, Knight is a perfectionist in both her weaving and twining and is a gifted teacher with a no-nonsense approach. Some weavers have the gift of being able to weave extraordinarily beautiful cloth, but not all those who weave have the ability to pass their knowledge and skills on to others. Nike often says, "Before the French," when telling me about weaving and Montagnard culture. "No weaving with cotton before the French," she told me. Fiber was made from bark and bast fibers before cotton thread made its way into the Central Highlands. In Vietnam in the 1950s, Nike once traded 15 blankets and skirts for one buffalo. It took her 3 months to weave the cloth. Buffaloes were used in earlier times for sacrificial purposes, but also for work in the fields. Nike tells me that during this time she also used to gather vines and leaves from the krum tree and ash from the banana tree to make a black dye, the dominant color in Jarai textiles. Her hand-spun thread would be immersed in the dye bath for 1 to 6 months. Today, she and most of the other Montagnard weavers prefer commercially prepared thread made in France. In 1961, Nike was married in Bomitot to her husband by a Catholic priest. During the upheaval of the Vietnam War, she lived with the Banar people in Pleiku and endured the long imprisonment of her husband, 10 years in the South and 10 years in the North. After arriving in North Carolina in 1996, both Nike and her husband worked many years in the furniture industry. Now the couple is retired and live in a small apartment in Greensboro. Their children are all far away in Vietnam. Nike's special joys are her ability to grow a few eggplants and cucumbers outside her apartment and use the large oak tree in her front yard to warp her looms. When she's ready to buy thread, she regularly weaves skirts with the distinctive gâté designs twined across the bottom. Once, in Vietnam, she told me, she stayed up all night thinking about the colors and patterns for her next gâté design. I first met Hetep in the summer of 2010 at a meeting I helped organize with Montagnard pastor Ihani, inviting weavers to attend, but afterward she disappeared. None of the other weavers I had met knew who she was. 6 months later, she showed up at my ESOL class, the first time she had enrolled in since coming to the United States almost 2 years ago. One of my ESOL students recognized her from a photo I took and brought her to class. Now she attends school regularly. She is one of many Benong women who now come to school, learning their ABCs for the first time. Sadly, it's not unusual for Montagnard women to be afraid of school. The shock of arrival, language barriers, family responsibilities, and numerous other obstacles provide plenty of excuses to delay their education. Understanding these barriers, I incorporated English lessons and confidence-building measures into the weaving documentation efforts. Hetep is a quick study, garrulous, and does not hesitate to let us know when things are good, jak, or no good, mo jak o. Often, Montagnard women in the United States have to give up weaving to care for their children and grandchildren. Hetep is able to fit her weaving activities into her large family's busy schedule. She is a knowledgeable weaver and has easily learned how to warp on the warping board Ju's husband made and has participated in all of the backstrap weavers' meetings and public demonstration events. Broy is one of the few younger weavers that I encountered. She's from the Banar tribe and is now in my ESOL class learning English. She arrived in Greensboro in 2010, bringing with her her 5 children and reuniting with her husband Trom after 3 years. She was separated from her husband after he fled to a refugee camp in Cambodia to escape religious persecution. After he came to the United States, her husband eagerly came to English class, and he told stories about life as a traditional subsistence farmer. Like Ju's husband, Trom is inventive with his hands and used to making things from available materials like wood and bamboo. Broy learned Ju's warping techniques and now warps her own looms using the warping board Tomas created. Usually Banar and Bunung woman warp on stakes driven into the ground or on the legs of upturned tables. When given a spinning wheel, she spins puffs of cotton into thin thread, having learned this long ago from her mother and sisters. Montagnard women prefer the thinnest thread for their textiles and don't readily substitute thicker, less costly thread for traditional patterns. When Broy is not weaving and spinning with other Montagnard women, she takes care of her family and helps her husband at a local organic farm. Numerous other women and men from the Montagnard community shared with me their knowledge of dyeing threads, warping, and weaving. Those who no longer wove shared old French video documentaries while we ate bamboo and pumpkin leaves with hot peppers. They showed me their backyard gardens and family pictures from Vietnam. Some shared their performances of jing music or told me chilling stories of life on the run in the jungle after the fall of the South Vietnamese government. I will continue to learn more about the culture of the Montagnard people, their languages, and their struggle to be a unified people in America.